Thank you for joining us for our session on using the deaf-blind child count to improve identification. The contents of this presentation were developed by the presenters for the 2021 OSEP conference. However, these contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. I want to give brief introductions here. I'm Robin Bull. I'm with the National Center on Deaf-blindness, and I'm the National Deaf-Blind Child Count Coordinator. I am joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Becca Smith, who's with the Office of Special Education Programs, and Sharon Walsh, who is representing the Center for IDA Early Childhood Data Systems, better known as the DAISY Center, and the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. Today, we're going to give a brief overview of deaf-blindness and the importance of identification. Take a look at the child counts in which data about deaf-blindness is reported, and highlight some strategies we are using to improve identification and referral. As a National Technical Assistance and Information Center, NCDB is a part of a network of projects that helps those who support children and youth who are deaf-blind. Our key focus is to assist state deaf-blind projects in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, the Pacific Basin, and the Virgin Islands. We support their efforts to provide a range of services from child-specific assistance to state system-wide efforts to create or improve state and local services. We also maintain the National Deaf-Blind Child Count. It's authorized by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, and state data is compiled and reported annually in the National Deaf-Blind Child Count Report, which was first reported and published in 1986. Today in the U.S., there are about 10,000 children who are deaf-blind, and no two are alike. There's a wide spectrum of losses in both hearing and vision. Variations occur in the causes, the age of onset, the levels of sensory loss, and additional disabilities that they may have. Because it's so individualized, services and supports must be designed to meet each child's unique abilities and needs. The early years are critical, especially in the areas of social, emotional, and communicational development. Early intervention services can help families and service providers understand the child's sensory impairment and how they can support the child's growth and development. This graphic gives a perspective of the low incidence nature of this population. The large blue circle that's seen here represents the U.S. population. This is the birth through 21 population. The small yellow circle that's inside the blue circle represents the special education population. And within that, there's a tiny red dot. And that red dot is so small, it needs to be magnified. And this represents the deaf-blind population. And this highlights the importance of partnerships, because although it looks small on this graphic and on caseloads, it's the whole world to the family who has a child with deaf-blindness. Diversity and equity means serving all children, and meeting the needs of this low incidence population is critically important. There are over 70 causes and contributing factors that lead to deaf-blindness. Some are more common causes, such as premature birth and charge syndrome. Others, such as microcephaly, are not as common, but known to lead to vision and hearing impairments. And while prematurity isn't a cause directly, many complications that arise in children who are premature can lead to combined vision and hearing loss. Early identification and referral to appropriate services can make a tremendous difference for a child with a dual sensory loss. A team approach, including family professional partnerships, are essential for promoting optimal outcomes. Connecting families together to learn from one another and encourage each other is vital. Sibling support programs are often highly beneficial as well. As a low incidence population, it is critically important for families to be connected to the latest research and researchers to be connected to the latest information regarding this population in order to improve the quality of care and outcomes. And lastly, the national and state data is crucial for informing changes to federal and state legislation or creating new legislation. And now I will hand it over to Becca Smith, who will give a brief overview of the child count collections.
Okay, well, thank you, Robin. It's a wonderful start. Now let me go and spend a few minutes going over 2 data collections that can be used to research data on children with deaf-blindness: the IDA Part B child count and the National Deaf-Blind Child Count. I'll briefly go through the 2 collections to show where the similarities and differences between them are. So here's a quick comparison of the 2 collections. On the left side is the IDA Part B child count. On the right is the National Deaf-Blind Child Count. There are several differences I want to draw your attention to. First, the IDA Part B child count collects data on children served under IDEA with all disabilities, whereas the National Deaf-Blind Child Count collects only data on children with deaf-blindness. Secondly, the data stewards for the data collections are different. The U.S. Department of Education collects and manages the OSEP, the Part B child count, while the National Center on Deaf-Blindness manages the National Deaf-Blind Child Count. Third, the sources of the data for the data collections are different. State educational agencies, or SEAs, collect and report the data for the IDA Part B child count, whereas the data for the National Deaf-Blind Child Count is reported by state and multi-state deaf-blind projects. Finally, the children reported under the category of deaf-blindness is different. We'll go into this more in depth in the next few slides, but the IDA Part B child count only categorizes children as having deaf-blindness if they have deaf-blindness, do not have a developmental delay, and if their deaf-blindness is not combined with another disability category. In comparison, the National Deaf-Blind Child Count reports children with deaf-blindness regardless of any other disability they may have or the severity of their hearing and vision loss. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into how the IDEA defines children with deaf-blindness. IDA Part B, Subpart A, Section 300.8C2 defines deaf-blindness as concomitant hearing and visual impairments, the combination of which causes such severe communication and other developmental and educational needs that they cannot be accommodated in special education programs solely for children with deafness or children with blindness. Now let's go to the next slide to learn a bit more about which children with deaf-blindness are categorized under the label of deaf-blindness in the IDEA data collection. Here we see the IDEA regulations, Part B, Subpart F, Section 300.641, with information about how state educational agencies are required to report children with disabilities. Under Section C, we see the SEA may not report under a child under more than one disability category. There's 13 approved disability categories. In Section D, we see additional instructions on how children with more than one disability should be reported. If a child has only 2 disabilities, and those disabilities are deafness and blindness, and the child is not reported as having a developmental delay, that child must be reported under the category deaf-blindness. Now, the second part, a child who has more than 1 disability and is not reported as having deaf-blindness or having a developmental delay must be reported under the category multiple disabilities. These reporting instructions mean a child with both visual and hearing loss may, depending on the severity of the loss and their other disabilities, be reported under a disability category other than deaf-blindness in the IDA Part B collections. Next slide, please. So now you know a little about how children's disability categories are reported. Let's take a look at some of the data from the Part B 2019-20 school year. This consists of children ages 3 through 21 in the US, outlying areas, and freely associated states. As you can see, the largest disability cohort was students with specific learning disability, making up over 2 million students in 2019-20. In contrast, at the very bottom, the smallest disability cohort reported was students with deaf-blindness, making up just shy of 2,000 students at 1,721. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at how this IDA child count figures compare to the national deaf-blind child count figures. At the top bar, you see the IDA child count figure of about 2,000 children that we saw in the previous slide. Below, we see the deaf-blind child count figure for the same year, nearly 10,000 children, 9,867. That's 5.7 times as many children as are reported with deaf-blindness as in the Part B child count. Next slide, please. But how can those counts be so different? I'm going to switch over here and share a few resources from the National Center on Deaf-Blindness on the National Deaf-Blind Child Count. On the screen, you see information taken from the 2019 National Deaf-Blind Child Count Annual Report. This provides a definition for the National Deaf-Blind Child Count Report. It's conducted each year to supplement OSEP's federal IDA Part C and B child counts, which include children as deaf-blind only when deaf-blindness is their single disability. In contrast to OSEP's Part C and B child counts, the National Deaf-Blind Child Count data is collected for children whose disability is solely deaf-blindness, as well as those identified with deaf-blindness and have additional disabilities. 87% of children on the National Deaf-Blind Child Count have 1 or more disabilities in addition to deaf-blindness. So finally, here is a chart of some data taken from that annual report. The data shows responses by the state and multi-state deaf-blind projects to the question of which category children with deaf-blindness were reported under in the IDA Part B child count. At the top of the list is multiple disabilities, with nearly 4,000 children. Second most common, with about half as many children, is deaf-blindness. However, you can see that children with deaf-blindness are reported under all of the different disability categories collected under IDEA. From this, you should take note that while the IDEA data collections are a great source of rich data on all children with disabilities, if you are trying to parse out information solely about children with deaf-blindness, the National Deaf-Blind Child Count can provide more detailed analysis. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Robin Vole for some more information.
Thank you, Becca. The value in data is not just to collect and report the information. It's transforming the information into a picture that reflects the needs and successes of children who are deaf-blind, and using that information to make decisions that improve the outcomes for children with dual sensory loss. We will next look into some ways that we have used the information from the deaf-blind child count at the national and state levels. To begin with, we have a breakdown of children who are deaf-blind by age groupings for the birth through 21 population. We analyze and use birth through age 2 and school age child count information to highlight trends in relationships. Here we see the national numbers double from 658 in the birth through 2 age group to 1,299 in the 3 to 5 age group. And then we see the numbers, of course, increase for the school age groupings that we see on this chart or this graph, but we want to focus in on those younger kiddos. So we're going to dig a little deeper into that. And with that, we have a table on this slide that shows children with the individual ages birth through age 6. And with this table, we have the individual ages listed with the count for each of those ages. So we start out at birth through 1 at 72 is the total count we have for those children. And then age 1 goes up to 206. Age 2 we see at 380. Age 3, 431. Age 4, it just goes up a little bit more to 435. And then at age 5, we see it actually decreases slightly, 433. That's pretty negligible. And then at age 6, it starts to increase again to 495. So what we see here is that we have some slow progression being made at identifying and receiving referrals in the birth through 2 age group up to age 3. But then the projects can lose track of children as they transition from Part C to Part B, Section 619 services. And then the numbers start to pick up again when they hit school age. So state projects can use this information to examine systems for improved continuity of services and seamless transitions within their state. So here we have a graph of our race ethnicity breakdowns by age group. And we see that certain population groups are not identified until later ages. And the Hispanic, Latino, and Asian populations are examples here. And using our race ethnicity data and other information, our cultural competency work group chose to focus initial work efforts on the Hispanic and Latino population. We also are using the deaf-blind child count data with our partners to look deeper into subsets of our population. Limited research and a range of anecdotal information from professionals in the field suggests that prevalence of vision and hearing loss in the population of individuals with multiple disabilities is significantly higher than currently reported. We have a technical report coming out soon on the population of students with dual sensory loss and significant cognitive disabilities from our partnerships with ATLAS, which is the University of Kansas Accessible Teaching, Learning, and Assessment Systems, the University Center, which houses the Dynamic Learning Maps Consortium. This report analyzes data sets from the deaf-blind child count and the first contact survey. And this study produced some interesting insights into the population with significant cognitive disabilities, and particularly those with cortical visual impairments. Also, genetic testing has increased identification of children with Usher syndrome at much earlier ages. And we're partnering with the Usher Syndrome Coalition to look more closely at additional data related to this subpopulation. We have a peer learning community made up of state deaf-blind projects. They were focused on improving identification and referral efforts. This slide just shows a snapshot of a dashboard included with an individualized state profile, data file that we have created for state projects to look at identification trends within their state, to compare to national deaf-blind child count averages, as well as state IDA data numbers. Also, state projects have been able to use the data to target TA efforts, to build plans, and to use as conversation starters with their partners or potential partners within their state. For a state-specific example, we look to Washington State. The State Deaf-Blind Project has built a strong partnership with their Part C lead agency, and using their child count data, they were able to target specific areas that were being under-identified. And through that collaborative partnership, they were able to provide training and support to professionals and families in those underserved areas. And identification in those areas improved dramatically, with them identifying 15 new infants and toddlers through those efforts. And those professionals and families are now able to receive training and resources geared specifically towards the needs of children with dual sensory loss. We couldn't possibly meet the needs of children and families without partnering with the wonderful family-focused organizations like Hands and Voices, the National Foundation for Deaf-Blind, the Charged Syndrome Foundation, the Usher Syndrome Coalition, and the Center for Parent Information and Resources. And Sharon is going to wrap up now by sharing a little bit about some additional partnership activities that we have been involved with. Sharon?
Thank you, Robin. That was so helpful. I am Sharon Walsh, and I work with the OSEP-funded DAISY Center and the ECTA Center. And my task as we begin to wrap up our short time together today is I want to go back and remind you of the title and the goal of this session. As Robin started us off and suggested, really, this is all about using data, and in particular, the child counts, in order to facilitate identification of the children and families who we want to be sure are identified to meet their needs. And of course, ultimately, as we all are wanting to do to improve outcomes for children and families. So think to what we've talked about over the last 20 minutes or so. And I would like to just share with you a couple of things about partnership and collaboration, and hopefully your role as we go forward in this. Keeping in mind the goal about using the data and using the child count to further identification, a number of us TA centers decided that we would form a partnership of our own. And we did that about a year and a half ago. And those partners are listed on the slide here for you to see: the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems, and the National Center on Deaf-blindness. And we formed a partnership, and as we proceeded in our work, we thought it was critical to invite and add the Part C IDEA Directors Association, the state organization called IDEA Infant and Toddler Coordinators Association. And we formed this partnership. We meet monthly. We've already done a number of activities I want to mention for you, but we were building on our common core values that we all brought to the table, which was ultimately improving child and family outcomes and ensuring that we really honor and work toward equity, meaning serving all children, and being sure that we honored that in all the work that we did. We work, all of us, in helping states strengthen systems through collaboration, and that was one of our key focuses for most of our discussions. And of course, to use data to drive improvement. to look at all of the things that Becca talked about earlier and Robin talked about earlier about the differences in the child count, both for Part C, for Part B, and for the National Deaf-Blind count, see how we could use those data, analyze them, and help make improvements. Some of our activities have included, have already co-hosted a webinar and plan an additional webinar. This one in particular was for the Part C lead agencies to help inform them about the opportunities and the resources that are so unbelievably wonderful from the National Center on Deaf-Blindness, and that we have so much turnover in state Part C offices that in fact there are some states where this was in fact new and very helpful information to them. So the evaluations from that webinar were very strong. We work together to disseminate information across all sorts of venues and vehicles, linking resources on our websites, etc., all about trying to increase people's awareness about the importance of this topic and the importance of these data collections to meet the needs of children and families. We're beginning a new activity just now, which would be co-writing and hopefully publishing articles or briefs on the importance of this topic. And last but not least, we're planning a spin-off activity, planning on inviting the National Association of State Directors of Special Education, or NASD, so that we can focus our work not just on Part C, as we have been, or birth to 3, but also on the 3 to 5 population, dealing with children who are preschoolers who are in special education and the services for them and for their children and their families. So if we go to the next slide, in the interest of time, I'm going to close us out by asking you to think about, if you would, as we're adjourning, think about what chair you sit in, what role you play, and think about the importance of the things we've talked about, and see if you can identify for yourself what might be a collaboration or a partnership you want to engage in, a contact you want to make, a data collection you want to review, or data you want to analyze, so that you can also contribute to the overall goals and outcomes that we've talked about earlier in the session. And with that, I'm going to close this out. Wish you well, take good care, and I hope you have a terrific rest of the leadership conference. Thank you.